Okay, let's get started. Wanted to welcome everyone. This is probably our most popular webinar to date. I am Geoff Ellis, the Chief Operating Officer at Wherefour, and I am happy to have with me today Rachelle Khalife, who is the Director of Regulatory Affairs at Food Label Maker. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We are going to pack a lot of information into about a half an hour, as we like to do, give you a lot of information as quickly as possible. We will be launching a poll here in a couple of minutes, and there's just a couple of questions on there just to kind of direct our conversation today. And then secondly, if you do have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to enter those in the Q&A. We will either just answer those in line or type the response in the box there. Everybody can see that. We will, without further ado, we'll kind of get started here. As I mentioned, here's a quick agenda. We're just going to introduce ourselves and our companies for those of you who are not familiar with us. Go through some of the things and whether you're a retailer that already has space on the big players' shelves, or if you're trying to get it, we're going to have information that is certainly relevant and useful for both of those scenarios. And you can kind of read through. We're going to kind of go through some of the labeling requirements and the pitfalls and things to watch out for. Same thing on the traceability, recall, readiness front. We want to make sure that we cover those things. So in addition to pitching your product, you obviously have to have a great product, but there's a lot that goes behind it as well that may not be obvious to some folks that are newer into the business. So quickly, Wherefour is an award-winning manufacturing ERP. This is a list of some of our customers that we work with. We work with many, many hundreds of food companies, nutraceutical, cosmetics, anybody who has compliance requirements across a number of industries. We work with those because we specialize on making sure not only folks can manage their inventory, but also that they're doing it in a compliant fashion. I'm going to kick it over to Rachelle here quickly to talk a little bit about Food Label Maker.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Geoff, for the introduction. And before I dive into the labeling mistakes and requirements, and trust me, there are a lot of them, let me quickly introduce you to Food Label Maker. Food Label Maker is an AI-enabled platform that's built specifically to help food manufacturers with recipe formulation, nutrition analysis, and regulatory compliance. So basically, our platform has built-in regulations covering 8+ markets. So this includes the United States, Canada, Mexico, Europe, and many more countries. So whether you're selling maybe domestically or perhaps scaling internationally, we've got you covered. The platform also gives you advanced recipe insights and reports. So you're not just getting a nutrition label, you are also getting a suite of recipe and nutrition analytics tools that are built on your real ingredient and your formula or formulation data. And everything I'm about to show you, all of that complexity is always handled automatically inside the Food Label Maker platform.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that intro. If you don't mind, we'll again kind of go through the different things that new suppliers are evaluating. If you could talk a little bit about the importance of label accuracy, that would be great.
Yes, absolutely. So one of the many aspects that retailers check for in new suppliers and new products, it's usually the label accuracy. And to win over retail buyers, your label must prove compliance. So this includes accurate nutrition facts panels, serving sizes, clear allergen flagging, and all of this is necessary to manage liability to ensure that eventually your product will actually sell and stay on the shelves.
Do you have any horror story anecdotes about things where this might have gone wrong with some folks that you're familiar with?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I want to take it back to last year, so 2025. A popular baby food brand failed to include the egg allergen in the contain statement. And even though it appeared in the ingredient list, this misstep posed a risk to infants, obviously, with egg allergies and led to eventually voluntary recall. So a small mistake can end up in a very big regulatory take up from the market.
Yeah, that's I know allergens are Definitely a big deal these days. Uh, a couple more things about what the retailers are evaluating from an operational standpoint, and it might surprise some folks that haven't been through the process. They can really dig into your business pretty deeply, and certainly from lot traceability records, but also getting an understanding of how your operations work, making sure you have specific production SOPs in place that are compliant with safety standards. And as you can see, a lot of them have, just as a litmus test, specific food safety credentials that you need to have in place. Certainly a HACCP plan, SQF certification, other third-party certifications, things like that, that literally will stop you at the door if you don't have them in place already, or they'll delay it. Hey, we like your product. You need to get these things in place before we'll put you on the shelf. And you don't want to let opportunity pass when it only sometimes strikes very quickly. Um, so we'll go through first. We're going to go through some of the labeling requirements and very importantly, some of the common flags that we want to make sure folks are aware of and specific requirements that retailers are going to have in common.
Yes, so basically, thank you, Geoff. So basically, when you look at your packaging or when retailers actually look at your packaging, there's a lot more going on than most people realize. So different retailers like Trader Joe's or Kroger, for example, have their own perhaps custom banned ingredients, for example, but the FDA requirements are the baseline for each supplier and retailer. So with that said, let's walk through the 7 things that actually live on every label. So we're going to start by the product name and identity. And this sounds simple, right? So just write the name, but the FDA is very specific here. So you cannot just call something milk or yogurt because it contains dairy. For a product to meet the FDA standards of identity for milk, it actually has to meet a strict minimum of 8.25% milk solids, not fat, for example. And the same thing goes for juice, chocolate, or butter. So these are all regulated terms with specific standards of identity. And if you use the wrong one, you're probably looking at a rejection. So you have to be very mindful here. Another element is actually the net quantity of contents. Again, it sounds simple. It's just the weight or volume of a product as sold. But the FDA is incredibly strict about the details here. So you cannot just list ounces, for example. You must provide a dual unit declaration. So this means basically your US customary units, like ounces or fluid ounces, must come first, and then they would be followed immediately by the metric equivalent in parentheses, so grams or milliliters. And in addition to the units, you have to place the net quantity of content statement in the bottom 30% of your front label. Next up is RACC, which stands for the reference amounts customarily consumed. And it's a common misconception that R&D teams or marketing teams get to decide the serving size for a product. And in reality, the FDA has already established these amounts based on product categories. So, for example, with snack foods and chips, brands often use unrealistically small serving sizes, such as about 7 chips, and this doesn't reflect how people actually eat, or they tend to miscategorize a product under the wrong RACC category to get a more flattering label. And in that case, your serving size must be anchored to the FDA's reference guidelines. Miscalculating this is truly one of the most frequent compliance mistakes we see, and we'll eventually look at a real world example on this in just a moment. Next up, you also have the nutrition facts panel. So you probably all know that there are standard nutrients required on the panel, but what most people don't know is that there are fixed rounding rules for every single nutrient and every percentage daily value added on the label. And these rules tend to get updated regularly by the FDA. And with that in mind, every nutrient has its own rule. So with Food Label Maker, you do not have to worry about keeping up with the changing regulatory guidelines or rounding rules. We automatically apply and update the nutrient values the moment the FDA changes anything. And last but not least, we have the ingredient statement or the ingredient list. And this one looks the simplest because it's just stating the ingredients, right? But the FDA is very serious about ingredient statements, and this often includes rejections and product recalls because the ingredient statement ideally has to be listed in decreasing weight order. But beyond that, the naming conventions are very strict. So, for example, you cannot just say or write flavor. You have to display if it's a natural flavor or an artificial one. Another thing is e-numbers, for example, for additives. These are usually perfectly acceptable in Europe, and they oftentimes they don't need to be written out by e-number or code. They have to be written by their full common name in the US. So also something as perhaps as small as writing annatto versus annatto extract color can get your label flagged. So these small details are very important while listing out the ingredients for your products. And last but not least, moving on to allergen declaration. This is where most of you are already paying close attention, I believe, and it's for a good reason because the stakes are very high. While you've always been required to specify, for example, the exact type of a tree nut, meaning almonds or cashews, for example, on the label. The FDA has recently tightened the regulations for compliance even more. So, in fact, under their major recent update, the FDA has pruned the official tree nut list entirely. And the biggest shocker is coconut is no longer considered a priority tree nut allergen. So, it's been officially removed from the list, meaning you no longer have to declare it as a major allergen in your contained statement. So, if you're auditing your labels for compliance this year, big grouping is definitely out, and the official tree nut list is a bit smaller. And of course, precision is everything. And finally, I have to mention that each market has its own set of regulations. So if you're selling in multiple markets, the rules change. So for example, Canada requires bilingual labeling, Europe uses different daily reference values, and Mexico has its own front of back warning system. So what's compliant in one market can get you rejected in another, especially if you're talking about the US and FTA market. Right, and that's it for the 7 elements on packages. Thank you.
That's a lot to keep track of.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's dive into the points we've mentioned a bit deeper. At first glance, you might think that the label on the left is a compliant label, but it actually lacks a lot of the components we've mentioned earlier. So we circle back to the RACC, or the reference amount customarily consumed. The RACC is the FDA's, as I said, defined standard portion that's used to determine serving sizes on nutrition facts labels. So basically, it reflects how much people typically consume at one time, ensuring consistency across similar products. And as you can see, the granola bar label on the left lists a serving size of 22 grams, which is not aligned with the FDA RACC. And it's also missing actually the number of servings, as you can see. So to make this compliant, the 40-gram RACC should be considered, and you should also add in the number of servings per container. And at Food Label Maker, we simplify this process by including the full RACC list during your recipe setup, which allows you for an easier selection of the right category for your product. And we also automatically calculate the number of servings per container for you. So no need for you to be doing any of the manual work. You'll also see or notice on the left side, vitamin D and added sugar fields are missing from the label. So this renders it non-compliant. And the FDA actually has around 15 mandatory nutrients to be displayed on each NFT for packaged food products. And this, of course, includes vitamin D and added sugar. So at Food Label Maker, again, we automatically calculate the nutrient values and display these mandatory nutrients on your final NFT. And lastly, I want you to take a look at the ingredient and allergen statement. At first glance, again, everything might seem fine, but if you look closely, you might notice that the sub-ingredient statement for the chocolate chips is actually missing. And almonds are actually flagged incorrectly in the contain statement. So it's displayed as a generic tree nut allergen, when in reality, you have to add it in as the specific tree nut name, so almonds. And again, these are simple, small mistakes that might occur and eventually might render your label non-compliant and misbranded as well. Okay, so this is for some of the mistakes on this slide. Moving on to the next slide.
Yeah, I've always wondered the recommended amount or the consumption serving size, how they come up with that, because I know I've eaten more than the serving size many times out of a bag of chips or something.
Right, so that's why it's always added in per serving, and you've got the number of servings there to guide you. Perfect. So I know we've covered the allergens, the ingredient statement, the mandatory nutrients, and the serving size declaration. Now I want to dive more into the format of the label. So when it comes to having FDA compliant labels for your products that eventually retailers will be having on their shelves, you have to take care of the entire format of the panel. So it's not just about adding in the information, it's also about presenting it correctly. So wrong format or missing required elements, such as you can see here on the left side, we have missing hairlines. So these are not there just for decoration purposes. They are there to distinguish each nutrient line and eventually make it easier for the consumer to detect each nutrient separately. And this will also help not confuse the customers, and it will help land your product in a regulatory compliant format. So it's crucial to get the basics right and follow the formatting guidelines to the letter. And as you can see here, the label to the left is missing some hairlines. It has some formatting issues, while the one to the right is a perfectly compliant FDA label, which includes the necessary format details, including the necessary dividers, hairlines, and display of the mandatory nutrients. All right, so moving on to the last regulatory aspect I'd like to highlight today, which is nutrition analysis. Nutrition analysis inaccuracies here can occur due to not accounting for moisture loss, for example, for this specific product, which is beef jerky, by the way. And this, of course, eventually will put your product at risk of being pulled from the shelves and eventually deeming it as misbranded, because you will be failing to account for or underestimating actually the nutrients per serving. As you can see here to the left side, this label calculation did not account for any moisture loss that, of course, takes place when creating a product such as beef jerky. And you might notice that a lot of the nutrients have been underestimated, especially calories. You'll notice that it's at 45 calories. If you take a look at the label on the right, this label took into consideration the moisture loss, and eventually the calculation of nutrients have been displayed correctly. And you can see that calories have more than doubled for the label that actually accounted for moisture loss. So we can see how important it is to account for nutrition analysis and moisture loss and yield adjustment processes to calculate the final label. And more importantly, at Food Label Maker, we handle this automatically. So you basically just enter your recipe in raw weights, and you apply the moisture loss percentage, and then eventually the label will be calculated on the finished as sold product automatically with no manual conversions needed.
Yeah, interesting. It just occurred
Yeah,
to me. I mean, we're talking about the retailers today, but it's also if you made a labeling mistake and that got into a press release to the end consumer, something like that, it'd be catastrophic for the food producer.
absolutely. Perfect. Okay. So everything I just walked you through, the RACC rules, the rounding rules, the hairlines and format, the ingredient naming and allergen declaration, all of these go into every single label, and they eventually make up a compliant version that will allow you to display your products on retail shelves and in markets. And of course, to keep up with all of these rules across different markets, across different product lines, it's actually a bit of a hassle. So that's why Food Label Maker bakes in all of these elements. So basically, you upload your recipe, and the platform automatically calculates your rounding rules. It determines your RACC. It generates your ingredient statement, and of course, displays the ingredients in correct order and correct naming. And we finally also display your allergens and flag them automatically for you. So this way, you do not miss any allergen and you do not end up having any misbranded or adulterated products. And of course, beyond compliance, you will get advanced features and reports to make food claims and protein claims perhaps for your products, adjust moisture content and add in processing loss, and also build in custom technical spec sheets, reports, and even more.
Well, great. That was a lot of information. I know we're about two-thirds of the way through here, so we'll start talking about the operational piece of it. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Rochelle. Very interesting information and almost overwhelming at times, which is why it's nice to have software to remember all that stuff for you. So we'll talk a little bit about the traceability, but at a base level, everybody who makes anything has to know what they bought, what it went into, and who it got sold to, which sounds simple, except every food company, almost without exception, has a multi-step process where you're making something that then becomes an ingredient and the next step in your process combined with other raw materials. So tracing those things from start to finish, and then ultimately you make five different products in five different package sizes. So you could have hundreds or thousands of SKUs, and tracing all that where all those products went to is no small task, and it's nearly impossible to do manually at any level of scale. And then also it's not as reliable either. Nobody looks upon manual records as something that's super reliable when humans are filling them out. There's also documentation attached to it that needs to be audit ready. So you may have third-party auditors coming in for SQF certification, but you can also have a third-party auditor come in specifically related to a large retailer that you're dealing with, and they do have the ability to dig into all of the same things and more that an SQ auditor might do. Um, so not only do you need to be able to produce this information, it needs to be done on a timely basis. So um, God forbid there's an actual real recall, but more commonly you're going to have mock recalls where you need to be able to produce all of the documentation and the records attached to the consumption and production and selling and purchasing of all of the materials that you deal with in your facility. And again, if you're a food manufacturer of scale with multiple product lines, that can go into the many thousands of raw materials and hundreds or even thousands of finished goods SKUs. You also need to be able to document that you did all of these things. So there's a lot to deal with, again, even before you get on the shelf at these places, and then on an ongoing basis, being able to produce this documentation over a period of time without fail is extremely important. So we're going to hop in very quickly into Wherefour to show you some of the way that we handle this. So I'm going to deal specifically with a situation where we have an auditor coming in and we need to produce documentation and traceability records around a specific recall from a raw material that was produced. So one of the things that you need to do is uh, in a very detailed fashion, document everything that gets done. So There's a date and time stamp attached to every inventory transaction in the software that's going to have the inventory item, the specific lot code attached to it. We do forced traceability, meaning that every material that's in the system has to have a lot code attached to it. In fact, you can't even bring inventory into the system without a lot code attached to it. So there can't be any mistakes there. In this example, it's a shipment to a specific customer that we've documented activity type, customer, and order, and then the amount of inventory that's going to them. And we're not dealing with it today, but in our system, we are building up cost as well. So we have full costing and profitability attached to transactions. So our scenario we're going to deal with today is we've got a specific lot of a raw material. Let's say we bought from Pacific Foods and we bought this raw material on a specific date, and we need to look at, first of all, a recall report attached to it. So they want to see on that specific lot of material on those cocoa beans, and we'll put the specific lot of material that went into it. Here's our recall report that we can produce in seconds. So here's our raw material. That's the subject of our recall. In this example, we don't have any of it left on hand. We wish we had all of it left on hand because that would make this a lot simpler. We do have some products we've made out of it, some work in process inventory, some finished good inventory, some more work in process inventory that we've made at different times using this raw material. And then we've also got a list of customers, the products that were made, the shipment date, who actually shipped the product, and the customer in specific order that it went out on. So we have a full recall report of what do we still have in stock, where did all the product go, all the finished good that was made with that raw material, what customers did it go to and when, so that we can notify them of the recall that's affecting them. And again, we don't need 24 hours to produce this. We don't need a couple of hours. That's the standard when you're going through a mock recall. We can get this done in seconds in the system. And then if we need to look at a very, very detailed version of this, I can go in and produce a start to finish trace where we get a very detailed version of when did we buy the raw material, what were all the specific work orders that it went into, all of the other ingredients that it was combined with to make our work in process items and ultimately our finished goods. And you can see there's a long, long daisy chain of where this product went, what it went into, when did we make it, what were all the products that we made out of it, and then again the same set of customers that got a shipment at the end, basically. Um, so that's that piece of it, and then we also have documentation attached to it. So you also have the ability to have documents that have been uploaded into the system. So if I go in here and type in that same lot code of, oops, I typed it in incorrectly. Um, if I've tagged any documents attached to it, so in this example, I did have a certificate analysis from the vendor for that specific lot of cocoa beans that was uploaded when we brought that material into the system. So as you can see, if you keep everything in one place, getting all the documentation and timestamp records to an auditor, or in the event of a recall, being able to produce this not in 24 hours, but in a very short period of time. Is very convenient to have in the system. So there's a lot more to compliance. We can document specific controls that we have in place. So taking the temperature of a truck, those sorts of quality assurance steps that we can inject into receiving and shipping and manufacturing processes. In the limited period of time we have this webinar, we're not going to go into detail on those, but suffice to say, you can attach any quality control records and activities that take place attached to inventory. Those can also be documented and recorded in the system. So that's a very quick demo. And I'm going to go here quickly back and just kind of recap things. But again, want to thank everyone for attending today. Marrying together compliance and inventory management with proper labeling through the APIs and Wherefour and Food Label Maker is a perfect way to cover all of your compliance requirements using software in a very easy fashion to make sure and ensure that you are producing compliant products and you've covered all your bases, not only for just to get onto the retailer shelves, but from a legal standpoint, because there's tremendous exposure. So thank you very much, Rochelle. Thank you for attending today. Certainly, if there's anything else you want to wrap up with, but we feel free to reach out to either of us at any point in time if you need additional information. We are happy to schedule a demo. We will be sending out an email with the recording of this. And again, thank you everyone for attending. And Rochelle, I'll kick it to you here quickly to wrap things up.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Geoff. And I hope everyone found today's session helpful. Again, as Geoff mentioned, if you need any further assistance or if you'd like to have a demo of either tool, feel free to reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to assist you further. Thank you so much.